It's baffled scholars for 2 millennia. It is a puzzle made of multi-dimensional elements, an enigma with roots that reach back to the dawning of time, perhaps before. Daniel explained part of it. Ezekiel and Isaiah had glimpses into it. John saw it all for the time of the end. That time is now. Join Derek and Sharon Gilbert on a journey that spans the course of history, from Eden to Mount Hermon, from Hermon to Babel, from Babel to Rome, from Rome to the cross, and from there to us. Biblical prophecy is coming true before your eyes, and to understand it, you must discern the times both then and now. It's time to unravel the threads of this all-encompassing prophetic paradox. It's time to unravel Revelation.
Welcome to Unraveling Revelation. I'm Derek Gilbert.
I am Sharon Gilbert, and we're delighted to bring you into our barn once again. The barn exists because of you, and we thank the Lord for each and every one of you.
Every day when we come out here to work, we are grateful and thankful for your generosity in helping us to do what we do, and to give us this wonderful workspace. It is a 30-step commute we've counted. So we are blessed that we can walk from the house and walk here and have this wonderful workspace, which again is only possible because of your generosity and your blessings. Most of all, we covet your prayers, and we do thank you for those as well, because we are living in interesting times. As our friend Carl Gallup says, the most prophetically significant time since the first coming of Jesus. And boy, I'll tell you, we have certainly seen that ramp up over the last month or so.
We really have. You know, those disciples who were living in the first century, they lived a very difficult life. They spread the gospel message without reserve and without fear. And yet, those of us today who live in our homes and see something on television, we all go, ah! Panic. And yet the Lord chose you to live now. Before you were born, when you were being formed in your mother's womb, He knew you. He designed you. You are here for now, in this time period, for a reason.
Absolutely. And I think throughout history, there must have been periods, including in the first century, when people thought that things were so bad and so tense, and there was so much anger and struggle and conflict that it had to be the end of the age.
Well, absolutely. In fact, there have been a number of times throughout history, not only first century we know, because Paul was asked, did we miss it?
Did we miss it, right.
And he had to school them on why they had missed it.
Yeah.
But even after that, whenever things would happen, and you and I have taught, and we believe that the horsemen began riding in that first century, and they've been doing this sort of wave pattern, worse and not as bad. And 1666, for instance, the Great London Fire, there had been a plague just 2 years before. So many things had happened. They'd gone through this interregnum, and then Charles II came back. He became king. He didn't have any money. France was invading. The lowlands of around the William of Orange area, they were trying to invade. Louis the 14th wanted to invade. Everybody wanted a little piece of England, and so they all thought when that fire hit that was it, the end of the age.
Yeah, and we go back 100 years, just over 100 years ago. And as I've told you before, I've got some scans of letters that were written by my grandfather, who was part of the Allied Expeditionary Force in France in 1918 and early 1919. He was worked for the motor pool. Grandpa wasn't a big guy, so he wouldn't have made a great soldier, but he worked in the motor pool. And he would close every letter to my great-grandmother, "I am feeling fine and am in the best of health, your loving son, Eskel." And I wondered, why did he close every letter that way? I'm feeling fine, because that's when the great influenza, the Spanish flu, was hitting and killing between 20 and 50 million people.
Yes, a lot of people died because of that, and because of the war.
The war itself.
The soldiers themselves carried it from country to country.
Right, and of course the war itself, where soldiers were sent against modern weapons using tactics that derived from the 18th century. We're going to charge the line and charge the machine gun nest. It was horrific. It was a slaughter.
It was really awful. So,
in fact, it was World War I that really made a lot of people rethink the amillennial position of history. This is the belief. Now, we are premillennial. We believe that Jesus' millennial reign has not yet begun, that the 1,000-year reign is a literal reign and will begin when he returns. Amillennialism, which is a position that's officially held by major denominations like Roman Catholicism, most of the mainline Protestant denominations, that's just metaphorical. It's symbolic. It doesn't really mean Jesus will return and reign for 1,000 years. He will come back someday, but until then, the world would just sort of gradually become more and more Christianized until he returns.
And more, wonderful. Everything was going to get rosy. No.
Right. And in the 19th century,
belief that the golden age is coming back.
Yes, exactly. That is, that actually
exactly
derives
what
from the
it
pagan
is.
belief. So that belief was hard to justify in 1916, 17, 18, when you were having literally millions of soldiers being chewed up on the battle lines by machine guns, by artillery, by the newly developed battle tanks, by poison gas. And then, of course, you had the Spanish influenza, or the Great Influenza, that came and killed another, tens of millions of more people. So very difficult to get inside of the heads of the people who lived in that era and realize how apocalyptic that must have seemed. But since we recorded our last set of programs, you now know, and this is coming to you a couple of weeks after the most recent developments, so we won't be able to tell you if there is anything new that happens between this recording on April the 21st.
Today?
Yeah.
20th.
April 20th, you're right.
It is April 20th because we talked about this. You and I recorded PID Radio this morning, and we talked about how today was Hitler's birthday.
Correct, right, okay.
And the 25th anniversary of Columbine.
Right. So by the time you see this program will be a couple of weeks old at least. But we wanted to timestamp it just so you know where we are in the timeline of history. And things are moving so quickly that's kind of important right now. You know that Iran launched a missile and drone strike for the first time directly from its territory against Israel just a week ago.
Birthdays, yesterday.
Oh, yes. Israel responded on April 19th. And that just happens to be the birth date of Ayatollah Khamenei, who turned 85 on the morning that reportedly the radar installation that protects the Natanz nuclear facility was taken out by Israel. So the Iranian attack on Israel may have been calculated to fail so that Israel wouldn't feel compelled to launch a really devastating strike. On the other hand, it may be that it was just a massive failure on the part of the Iranian attack. Regardless, Israel's response was very measured. They launched 3 missiles reportedly from Israeli fighter jets over Iraq, so they did not need to enter Iranian airspace. But what is going on here? I mean, when we looked at the video of the Iranian attack in Israel,
oh my goodness,
and seeing missiles being intercepted in video that captured the Dome of the Rock on the Temple Mount in the foreground, like
the Iron Dome intercepting missiles
above
the dome.
Over the Golden Dome, yeah.
Yes.
That was apocalyptic. That's the only way to describe that.
It really was. And I marvel at the Iron Dome system and the sling system, David Sling, I think it's called, and then the arrow system. They have these defensive systems that really do keep Israel safe in the material space. But I have to tell you, the real reason that Israel has lasted and is safe is because God holds his shield, his hand over that country and over those people. And so it is not Iron Dome, it's the Dome of Yahweh.
Absolutely. There are battles and events that took place in the wars of 1948, 1967, 1973 that clearly were the hand of God, because Israel should have been overrun, far outnumbered by the Arab neighbors that invaded. In 1973, the Egyptian army made such quick gains after they crossed into the Sinai Peninsula that they assumed that they didn't have a plan for what happened if they broke through the Israeli lines. And so they got disorganized, which gave Israel time to regroup, counterattack, and then drive Egypt back across the...
Is that in 67?
That was in 73, the Yom Kippur War.
Oh, that's right.
Similarly, the attack in the north by the Syrians, who came down across the Golan Heights, they made it to Tiberias on the west side of the Sea of Galilee, where we stayed when we were there.
Beautiful area.
Yes. And they had a clear path to Haifa from there. But the Syrian army, after having been humiliated and losing the Golan Heights in 1967, were convinced that the Israelis were drawing them into a trap. There's no way we could have made such gains so quickly. There is no way the Israelis were so unprepared that we would already be on the west shore of the Sea of Galilee. So they stopped, which gave Israel time to regroup.
That's the heavenly host.
It was God sending a spirit of fear amongst the enemy, which allowed Israel to drive them back.
We see in the Old Testament all the time.
Right, right. So in trying to look at and try to analyze this without trying to see prophetic fulfillment in every single headline that comes across. But again, when we see what we've seen over the last few weeks, it's difficult not to, right? Those images of the missiles over the Temple Mount is just astonishing. Our friends in Israel saying at 2 a.m, standing out on their front porch and looking at missiles flying overhead.
Now, this comes at a time, I just need to remind everybody that there are those who are adamant in Israel, and this is a small group, for the return of, for the appearance of Messiah. They're not looking for the return, they're looking for the first visit, because they got it, they're wrong. But they want to make him appear, immanentize the eschaton. They want to force the end of days. And it's done, they believe, by that heifer being sacrificed and burned. And we know that there are 5 heifers. You and I think they're probably too young, but we keep seeing stories that the plan is to go ahead and sacrifice. By the time you're watching this, you're sitting there talking to us and saying, no,
that didn't happen.
That didn't happen, or yes, that did happen, and we all know how that led. That sort of behavior is antagonizing the nations that want to destroy Israel.
Right, saying, look, Israel is trying to impose a theocracy on the Muslims and the Christians who live in the land. Yes, the reports are that this sacrifice would take place on April 22nd, which again is history for you now. That is still 2 days in the future here, date of Passover. But everything I've read, because I've gone back to double check my figures, double check our report when we talked about this on our podcast, PID Radio, last July, according to the Times of Israel, it was the heifers then were 22 months old. And everything that I've read, and this is not in the Bible, this is a reference to the Numbers chapter 19 ritual for purification, where the red heifer has to be sacrificed and the ashes mixed with water and then used for purification. There are rabbinic traditions that extend that well beyond what's in the Bible. Everything I've read, including at the Temple Institute, which is the most active and well-known organization pushing for or promoting the idea of a third temple on the Temple Mount, that the heifers have to be 3 years old. And not in the 3rd year, which is what I've read some people say.
I've read under 3, no older than 3. I've read 3. I've read in the 3rd year. I've read so many opinions on that.
But at rabbinic websites, like the Temple Institute and a couple of others, it is 3 years old, which would mean this fall at the earliest. Now, by the time you see this, we will either be proven right or wrong. We don't know. But certainly those involved in this would want to keep it somewhat concealed so as not to provoke a greater response. CBS News ran a story back in March that quoted a military spokesman for Hamas saying the reason they attacked last October was because of the red heifers at Shiloh.
That was their claim.
That's their claim. That's an excuse. Hamas was going to do this at some point regardless. But by getting that out there, then that allows people some justification for their anti-Israeli, anti-Jewish views of what's going on.
And that's something that I find so troubling, and I think it's another major hint that we are entering the very final moments of the end of days, if you want to, those final breaths in the scope of time, that anti-Semitism is, and today we mentioned Hitler's birthday. Anti-Semitism is so rampant. It's on almost every college campus. It's in major cities, and it is being allowed. And this morning on the news out of London, there was a story that talked about a pro-Palestine pro-Hamas. They come right out and say that they're pro-Hamas. And many, like Colombian University, many college campuses, they do it too. I don't think they really know what they're saying. But this pro-Palestine protest was taking place in London, and a gentleman who was on his way back from a service at a synagogue was walking past. He had every right to walk through there. He wanted to go home. He was wearing a kippah, the little yarmulke,
skull cap.
or skull cap.
Yep.
He was stopped by a policeman. The police were allowing the protest, but the policeman stopped this gentleman and said, "You are," how was it he put it?
Too obviously Jewish.
Too obviously Jewish. Either you leave or I make you leave.
Yeah.
Too obviously Jewish.
Yeah. And the guy's walking on his way home. He wasn't there to counter-protest or anything.
No, he had every right to walk to
Right.
every right.
Yeah. This really is evoking some very uncomfortable echoes of anti-Semitic pogroms
Yes.
that have taken place in past centuries. And I wasn't the direction I thought this show was going to go, but I think we need to continue on this
think it
along
needs
this line.
to go in this
Yep,
direction.
I agree.
If you're not sure what a pogrom is, essentially it's forcing people out of their homes.
Right.
You've got a choice. You can either convert or you can die.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the research you did on that for your Red Wing Saga series and the anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish sentiment that was very, very obvious in London at the time of Jack the Ripper when Unraveling Revelation continues. Summer reading season is just around the corner. We want to help you get ready.
You can buy fiction, you can buy nonfiction through the Gilbert House store, whichever you want. All of our books are 40% off. 40%.
That includes all 8 novels of the Red Wing Saga,
Book 9 is coming, probably early summer.
my 2 novels, and then, of course, all of our nonfiction stuff, including our most recent books, Giants, Gods, and Dragons, The Second Coming of Saturn, and Veneration, a deep dive into the cult of the Nephilim.
April and May, you've got 62 days. No,
Absolutely.
61.
That's-
April only has 30.
Regardless, through the end of May, 40% off on all of our books at the Gilbert House store, available only online. Go to gilberthouse.org/store. You'll find all the prices slashed on our books, 40% off, gilberthouse.org/store, and thank you for your prayers and support. Welcome back to Unraveling Revelation. I'm Derek Gilbert.
I'm Sharon Gilbert, and if you're sitting there yawning, don't you need a cup of coffee?
You do, and we can help with
We
that.
can. Yes, this is shameless plugging. But Amazing Grace, I mean, named after our dog, our flat-coated retriever, Grace. It's the sweetest little cup of coffee. Cookies and cream.
Yeah, and Grace is a sweet dog. She is so patient, comes out here to the barn when I'm out here working, and she will just lie there at my feet, wait for me to get done. Every now and then, if you watch my 5 and 10 reports for Skywatch TV, you'll notice she comes in and, nudges me with her
You're
nose.
done. That's enough.
Yeah.
This is 5 and 10, not 20.
Yep. But she is a very sweet dog, and likewise, Amazing Grace, just a very hint of cookies and cream in there. We've also got the Snarling Dachshund blend, which is a smooth Sumatran medium roast. But if you really need a good cup of coffee to wake you up, Derek's Bunker Buster. That's named for my podcast, A View from the Bunker. That's a dark roast Colombian. That's our favorite. We like a good strong cup.
It is. And we're working on a special blend for Glory.
Yes.
We're not sure what she is. She's a Glory dog. She looks a bit like a boxer, but may have a little pit in her. We're not sure. But
Yep.
she's sweet, and Grace is patient. She lets Glory just chew on her own.
Yeah, she does. The coffee is roasted in small batches by Kevlar Joe's Coffee in Southeast Missouri. We are happy to partner with them. It is a veteran-owned company. There are links at our store, gilberthouse.org/store, that take you directly to the Kevlar Joe's website, where they will ship them out, again, roasted in small batches, so it's always fresh. Please, if you love coffee, do yourself a favor and try some of the Gilbert House blends from Kevlar Joe's.
While you're at gilberthouse.org, go to the store, gilberthouse.org/store, and 40% off books.
Yep.
Any book, all books.
Through the end of May, take advantage of that special. We've also got streaming video. If you're preferring something in the spoken word, if you can't get enough of our blather, we do have a streaming video site where you can rent our tour videos. You can rent our presentations for as little as $3. It's gilberthouse.org/video.
You're going to need the coffee if you're going to watch those things, so be sure to get some coffee first.
Yeah.
Boy, I had to do a lot of research for the first book, especially, to get that idea of what it was like politically in the 1880s. 1888 is the official beginning of the Jack the Ripper murders, and that's when I began. Well, that's the main beginning of the book. It actually begins before that, but there had been decades of pogroms in the Russian-Ukraine area, and the Jews were being pushed further and further west, and they were moving again and again and again, and many of them died starved because they were being marched through snow in some cases. And those that managed to finally reach a welcoming city, many of them ended up either in Paris or Brussels, which actually became very anti-Semitic later, but London. There was a major wharf system in East London, and so many of them would actually depart their ships. They would find themselves unable to speak the language, not knowing the customs, and so decade after decade after decade led to a large portion of East London being primarily Jewish. So you had a lot of churches that were abandoned because the Jews didn't go to church. And so you would have churches that became other things. But there was a growing anti-Semitism. These people are coming and we don't like them. They don't speak our language. They don't know our customs. There had been previous to that, decades before that, Jews who set up in West London, in the Westminster area, and they many times were successful. And they were jewelers and tailors, and some were bankers, and they lived very well-to-do lives. And sadly, many of those Jews were also anti-Semitic. They did not want to help the unwashed who had come in from the Russian area.
They were too obviously Jewish?
I don't know what it was, but that was the terrible thing. You had all of these Jews living in East London that no one wanted to help. And in that mix of many cultures and anger and poverty, you had suddenly these murders that began officially in 1888. And I find it so interesting in the Red Wing Saga. I lead up to the birth of two main characters. They're twins of the main adult characters, twin children. And they are born in the same year, just a few months after, Adolf Hitler. And I do that intentionally because Adolf Hitler was raised, he was born into a culture that was highly anti-Semitic.
Right.
And so he's soaked in this a stew of anti-Semitism and elitism, and he even admitted that he believed he had a deity watching over him. I've read a number of biographies of him now, and had a deity watching over him that he called Providence, capital P. And I've seen other references in history to someone attributing their favor and their luck to Providence. It's another way of talking about Fortuna, which is an Italian goddess. He really believed he was all that in a bag of chips.
Divinely appointed for what he was doing for.
Well, yeah, divine in the traditional sense of the word, that it's a deity of some kind.
Not divine in the sense of being holy, but an unholy,
Very much, very much unholy. So when the Jack the Ripper murders began, it was assumed that it had to be a Jew.
Yeah. Well, there was that very famous wall scrawling that the Jews will not be blamed for nothing.
Yes, exactly. Which to this day it's uncertain who wrote it and why it was removed.
Right. It was,
Sir Charles Warren is said to have been the one who ordered it to be removed.
Yeah.
Now, there's not 100% proof that in writing Warren said that, but he's quoted as having been the one who said to take it down.
And Warren, of course, if his name is familiar to, he is a gentleman who we've mentioned several times in this program because he was the explorer in the late 1860s, 1869, who discovered that stone on the summit of Mount Hermon, the temple on the summit of Mount Hermon, that refers to the Watchers.
Yes, he stood on that summit.
Yeah.
He stood by that depression area that received the libation offerings. He walked that anti-clockwise wall that forced you to go towards that cup. He stood in that temple, Casa Antar, which is the oldest, highest old temple in the world.
Yeah, to this day, it's still the highest man-made place of worship on earth.
He stood in those places, and then he found himself almost within months of being appointed the commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. Jack the Ripper murders began, because there are some that began prior to the official ones. And he had to deal with all of that, and to the point that right about at the time when the very worst one, Mary Kelly, was to take place, he resigned. He'd had it.
Yeah. Bizarre, but true. There is a historic connection between Mount Hermon and the Watchers there and Jack the Ripper.
And that stela that he brought down from that summit is still in the British Museum. You and I wanted to see it, but it's not on display.
On display, yeah. And of course, the anti-Semitic culture of England at that time, and that part of London in particular, which again is really bizarre because Benjamin Disraeli was prime minister less than a decade before those murders began.
But he dealt with a lot of anti-Semitism.
Well, we are seeing it rising, and we're seeing it in the body of Christ now, especially among those. We did a program on this some months ago after the war began in October. The belief that we, the church, have replaced Israel in all of God's prophetic promises is behind a lot of this. If there is no prophesied role for Israel in the end times, then Israel is simply an obstacle that must be removed. Hal Lindsey wrote about this in his book, Road to Holocaust, years ago.
He did. I need to reread that. And look, if you follow that belief, I highly recommend that you read Lindsey's book, because there are YouTubers out there who are taking this text or this text out of context, and they are using it to support that belief. That is anti-Semitic. That is anti-God's chosen people.
Yeah. Read Romans chapter 11, beginning at verse 1. I ask then, has God rejected his people? By no means, for I myself am an Israelite, a descendant of Abraham, a member of the tribe of Benjamin. God has not rejected the people whom he foreknew. Do you not know that what the scripture says of Elijah, how he appeals to God against Israel? Lord, they have killed your prophets, they have demolished your altars, and I alone am left, and they seek my life. But what is God's reply to him? I have kept for myself 7,000 men who have not bowed the knee to Baal. So too at the present time there is a remnant chosen by grace. This was after the church. This was after Pentecost.
And that remnant chosen by grace is a foreshadowing of the 144,000.
Absolutely. More next week. Thank you for watching. This is Unraveling Revelation.
Unraveling Revelation is a viewer-supported outreach of Gilbert House Ministries. Follow us online at unravelingrevelation.tv and gilberthouse.org. We'd love to hear from you. Contact us through our websites or drop us a line at P.O. Box 78, Crane, Missouri 65633.